is Anne Fox. I am not a famous fox, I'm not Martha Fox, I'm not Foxconn from China. I'm just Anne Fox, and I'm representing Denmark. They gave me a really specific title, Online Education, State of the Art. So, and they said do it in 20 minutes or less. So I think that what you're going to see from me is probably going to be very different to what you would see from Lachlan or from Tour Life. So I think everybody would have a different interpretation of this. It's not like the canvas, which is a specific thing which you can go step by step. So, online education, what is the state of the art of online education? Well, I was thinking a little bit in the Irish way that that is the wrong place to start, because the place to start is really all about learning, because you do online education in order to learn something. And I was wondering if I could start from somewhere that we know. So, for example, if I say face-to-face learning, what pictures come in your mind? And I'm assuming that the pictures that come in your mind probably include things like this. So, the lecture, the homework, perhaps the group work. This is the classic face-to-face direct instruction, the traditional. But maybe you are also thinking about some other face-to-face situations. Perhaps project work. This is obviously a project. I just picked this picture off the internet. I have no idea the background, but it's obviously a project. They're obviously working in groups. They're obviously working towards some sort of end here because they've got a wall full of post-its. So this is very practical, hands-on. This is even more practical. This is the apprentice model. So this is an experienced person showing a young person how to do something. And this is a little boy watching how something is done. And I put that in to represent the sort of informal learning which we do every day. It didn't have to be a little boy, it could have been anybody. So I'm thinking that these also are traditional face-to-face learning situations. And whereas with the traditional face-to-face, it's easy to think, oh yeah, you online, you could do a video. In fact, they're videoing right now. We might transfer these talks online. That's easy. But how do you transfer this sort of situation online? Is it even possible? And so I would also think back, well, I can't think back, I'm not old enough, but when television was invented, what they showed on television, they didn't know what to do with the new medium, so what they did was they went to the old medium and they put TV cameras in theatres. So they used the new technology just to show the old technology. And what I'm suggesting is that we need to move on from the traditional face-to-face pictures which I showed at the beginning and think about how can we move on and maybe show the more collaborative learning, which is actually shown to be more effective in many respects, not always. And so this, we're talking about learning rather than online, rather than face-to-face. We're just talking about learning. And the next question is, what works in learning? Do we know what works in learning? And the answer is that we're getting there. And there have been studies done all over the world about what works in learning. Which is fine and jolly good, but it would take you hours and hours, days, months to find out about it all. Fortunately, there is somebody who's done that work for us, and his name is John Hattie. He's from New Zealand, and he has, not on his own, he's got loads of students to help him. He's done a study of studies, and he's found out what works. So I'm going to show you a horrendous table. Don't worry about it. But he has put the different types of activities we can do in the classroom or online, and he has summarized whether or not it has a good effect. And he's also he's attached a figure to how effective the different types of activities are. So I'm thinking we ought to, this is perhaps the starting point we ought to be taking. We ought to be looking at what works and then seeing if we can transfer that online rather than taking the traditional classroom as our starting point. And so what works? It's a list. Now let's have a look more closely at the list. I'm not going to go through the statistics, it's quite complicated. All you need to know is that if it's more than 0.4, it's really good. And you ought to be looking at it very seriously. If it's less than 0.4, then it's not so good. And so there are some surprising things that are less than 0.4. For example, parents always, if they have the choice, will choose to send their children to schools where there are small classes. And he's shown that small class size doesn't have any appreciable effect on people's learning. So that's a surprising thing. So let's not be negative. Let's not look at what doesn't work. Let's look at what does work. And basically, anything that's in the blue zone here is the thing that we need to do. And what comes at the very, very top, quite clearly above everything else, is feedback. Feedback is what works in learning. And feedback, the trouble with this is that you would have to investigate what actually these words mean. But feedback could be many things. It could be the teacher saying, yes, it's very good, you need to do more of this. It can be a test, it can be a quiz, it can be an exam, it can be your course colleagues who are working with you and telling you whether something is working. What is important, though, for learning is not just feedback, but it's constant feedback. That's what works. So what we need to do when we're looking at online learning is see how can we get constant feedback. So that was just a summary, really. Feedback comes at the top. Some of the things the teacher can't affect, like this student's prior cognitive ability, I think is code for how clever the student is. So you can't do anything about that. You can argue about that, but I won't do that here. So basically, and down here, another thing that's very down to the student is motivation. So anything we can do to improve motivation, and anything we can do to try and build in feedback is what works. So let's have a look. So we're going back to the traditional model. You could probably recognize this. This is the teacher interacting with the students. And we can transfer that online, that's no problem. But the problem with this is that it doesn't scale. I've just started a course with 15 students. The amount of postings that they have generated is already overwhelming for me as a teacher, so never mind for them as a student. So this is something that is not easy to scale. But if we talk about feedback as the most important thing, then immediately we think of, yes, then that means that the course must be interactive. But there are two meanings of interactive. Now then, if I go back to, I showed you 6 pictures of face-to-face learning. I could have shown you hundreds. I could also show you hundreds of pictures of online learning, because there are many, many different types of online learning. And here, the definition of interactive. The first one, designed to respond to the actions, commands, etc. of a user. That describes something that happens on the computer. That describes what happens, for example, if you do an invalid formula in Excel, you get an error message. That's interaction. There are lots of e-learning courses which are built on trying to predict what the possible answers could be. Then the student answers a question. If they get it right, they're allowed to go further. If they don't, they have to do more testing and so on. This is not the sort of course that we're talking about here, but it is a valid type of e-learning course in some circumstances. I'm not saying good and bad, I'm just saying different contexts. What we're talking about is this sort of learning where the interaction is people talking to each other. So if this is in some ways regarded as the best, actually we're missing a trick. if we don't also get the students talking to each other. So what we have to do when we're talking about online learning is we're trying to promote the students using each other as a resource, rather than always referring to the teacher. So that's one thing that we can do. And it's one thing that we can do online as well. And what else is possible online? The question is, well, if I go another way, I recently took a course where two Australian teachers, who are now based in America, were talking about what is it that you can do online with regard to education. And they came up with what they call these 7 affordances of online learning. I'm not going to go through them all, but maybe we can see some of them. For example, here, ubiquitous learning means that you can learn anytime, anywhere. And this is one example where online learning is an advantage over face-to-face. I've had an online student say to me, right at the beginning of the course, well, of course, this isn't going to be as good as face-to-face. Well, he was in China, and I was in Denmark, and there was no other way that he was going to get the skills that I was offering except online. So online was better for him, but he didn't know it. But ubiquitous learning, anywhere, anytime, we have reached a tipping point, I think, this year or last year, certainly this year, where if you look at the statistics, the way that people access stuff online is, I think, over 50% from a mobile device. We have reached that point. Maybe they can take audio when they're driving. Another thing that online is very good at is presenting information in different types of ways. And this is a personal thing, but I have this theory that we've been very focused on text for maybe the last 200 years, and I think that the reason for that is because the technology has only allowed us to have text. When my mother was at school, she didn't have pictures in her books. When I was at school, I had pictures in my books. Now we have everything, and I think that we should take advantage of it. Sometimes it is easier to explain things in a video, especially if it's technical stuff, than to read about it. So I think that we can take advantage of that. Collaborative intelligence is a very interesting one, because that is about making use of what other people have done. Okay, another word for this could be Googling. Basically, it's about getting access to the information that is already out there. It could be Googling, but it could also be back to the diagram that I showed before, where you are using the experiences of the people in the virtual room. So there are many advantages that we can take advantage of when we are planning our e-learning. And the Australian professor who was presenting this, he said at one point, technology does not necessarily change things at all. And what he meant is if I go back to the very first pictures that I showed you, a lecture is a lecture, and a lecture is maybe good face-to-face, maybe good online, maybe bad face-to-face, maybe bad online. It doesn't necessarily change anything. So we have to think about all of these in order to make sure that the technology can change something. So for example, in this project, one of the advantages we hope will be that we can get people from different countries and different industrial sectors talking to each other, which they wouldn't be able to do in a face-to-face, because it would be too expensive to bring all these people together in a course. So the next, you've seen this before, so I won't spend any time on this. We can also use the technology in order to make people more independent as learners, especially if we do it in this staged way, where we help them at the beginning and then gradually make them less dependent. So the next thing I'm going to mention is MOOCs, which, has anybody met this term MOOC? Yes, a few of you. Okay. It stands for Massive Open Online Course. They exploded onto the scene in 2012, although in reality I think they have been going for 10 years before that, but they just didn't get the publicity. That basically large universities decided to make their materials available for free, and not only that, they put them together into courses. They invited people to attend those courses for free. And a lot of people are wondering, why did they do that? It's a very expensive thing to do. Maybe it's marketing, and we don't know how long it's going to last. One thing that it is doing is it's giving us information about how we can learn online in a large crowd, because these courses typically attract thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, and I think once there was one that had over 100,000 students. So they attract lots of people, and they're using the technology to collect data about what works. So they're not being kind in giving us free courses. It probably won't last, but they're using it to find out all sorts of information. For example, does it work better if we divide a video up from 20 minutes into 4 5-minute videos? Do they watch more of the videos if you do it like that? If you have a test in the middle, does that make lots of people drop out? If you have 6 tests, does it make people drop out more? So they have all this data, and they can then use it for proper paying courses later on. So they're using these to collect data. So these MOOCs, massive courses, they are providing the materials, they're providing some assessment, they're making it free, and then they have a big dropout. People talk about this as this terrible thing, but I wonder if you've all got books at home, if you have read every book that you have at home. That's what I say when they say that. So from the MOOCs, we can now go on to what they call SPOCs. I think that's just the old-fashioned online course, actually, with a new name. Small, private online courses. They also have the materials. They also have the assessment. But they have restricted access so that the organisers can give more attention to the students, and they have much reduced dropout. So when we actually get to the course, how do we construct it? If we go back to what I said about learning, choosing, preferring that it's about interaction, then you need to start the course with the opportunity for students to get to know each other a little bit, so that they're not complete strangers. And this is something, well, first of all, access, making sure that the course looks good, is easy to access, which goes back to my mobile point. Then the socialization, and this is something that people often leave out, but it's very important. It depends on the subject of the online learning, but if you're going to ask students to say things about themselves which can be a little personal, and if you're talking about entrepreneurial skills, this could get a little personal, because you're talking about skills you have, skills you don't have, things you know, things you don't know. So you need to be able to trust the people that you're working with, and this is especially necessary when the people are geographically very far from each other. Then you can get them exchanging information, and then we can get to the stage where they're constructing knowledge together. And this could be equivalent to the business planning situation that we're talking about in our course. And finally, we're hoping that there will be some sort of lasting relationship. Maybe there will be some businesses that come out of this. So this is Julie Salmon, the 5-step model, and she talks about good practice. She talks about something called activities, whereby you trust the students to come with the knowledge. So you give them a spark, you give them a prompt. You say, what about this? If the question is good, then the interaction will happen. So you need good questions. And this is one of the critical parts of the whole online experience, is what is going to be the role of the moderator. Because if you have many students, then the role of the moderator can get a little bit overwhelming. And this is a question that I've met time and time again in projects where we're planning e-learning, is how much is the moderator going to do? And this is partly why, apart from the fact that it's pedagogically sound, it's partly the reason why we're going in the course to try and promote the idea of peer learning, so that the students are assessing themselves or critiquing themselves, reflecting on themselves, and giving feedback to each other, so that the onus on the moderator is less. So I didn't want to start from the online education. I wanted to start from learning, and my conclusion is that we have to apply what we know about effective learning when we're talking about designing both face-to-face and online learning. So that's what I had to say.